There's a rhythm to this life, a pulse that beats in time with the rumble of the diesel and the steady whine of the tires on asphalt. It's a lonely rhythm, but it's mine. For 15 years, it's been the soundtrack to my life, the metronome that measures out the miles between who I was and who I am. My world is a rolling steel box, a Peterbilt 389, and my home is wherever I can find a flat piece of ground to park it for my mandatory 10-hour break. This run was no different from 1,000 others. I'd picked up a reefer trailer full of Californian almonds from a processor in the heart of the Central Valley, destined for a packaging plant down in the sprawl of the Inland Empire. It's a straight shot, mostly, down the spine at California, the great Interstate 5. A road so familiar I could drive it with my eyes closed, though my logbook and the ever-watchful bears would strongly advise against it. The day started in the pre-dawn gray, the air thick with the smell of turned earth and fertilizer. I did my pre-trip inspection, thumping the tires with a mallet, checking the fluid levels, making sure the refrigerated unit was humming along at the correct temperature. You don't mess around with a load like this. It's someone's money, someone's livelihood sitting in that trailer. The paperwork was a thick stack of manifests and bills of lading, the usual scripture of the road. A quick call to dispatch, a gruff good to go from a guy named Frank I've never met in person, and I was rolling. The sun climbed as I merged onto the I-5, the traffic already building. Four-wheelers darting in and out of lanes, a river of commuters, salesmen, and families on vacation, all oblivious to the 80,000-pound beast sharing the road with them. They see a truck. I see a complex machine requiring constant attention, a rolling apartment and a mobile office. They're in a hurry to get to their destination. I am my destination, a self-contained island in a sea of motion. Hours bled into one another. The landscape of the Central Valley is a hypnotizing, monotonous blur of orchards and farmland, broken only by the occasional cluster of fast food signs and gas stations that mark a town. You learn to measure time not in minutes or hours, but by the mile markers that tick by, each one a small victory. You find ways to pass the time. Audiobooks, podcasts about history, and the endless chatter on the CB radio, a language all its own, filled with warnings about alligators in the road, lone tires, or Kojak with a Kodak, a cop with a radar gun. By late afternoon, I was approaching the Grapevine, that infamous stretch of I-5 that climbs and twists through the Tehachapi Mountains. It's a gut check for any driver, a steep grade that tests your engine on the way up and your brakes on the way down. But it's also a gateway. Once you're over the top, you're in Southern California, a different world. It was there, looking at the map on my phone while traffic slowed to a crawl for some minor fender bender, that the idea crept in. A shortcut. State Route 58. It cuts east from Bakersfield, a long, lonely two-lane that winds through the high desert. It could shave a good 90 minutes off the trip, maybe more. Dispatch wouldn't care, as long as the load arrived on time. Every driver knows about roads like the 58. They all have a reputation. The old-timers at the truck stops, the choking pukes as we call them, spin yarns about them over burnt coffee. They talk about strange lights, phantom vehicles, stretches of road where the radio just plays static. I'd heard the stories about the 58. They call it the High Desert Highway, and they say it has its own set of rules. I'd always chuckled at the tales. Fatigue, I figured. The mind plays tricks on you out here in the big empty. A deer becomes a ghost. A weather balloon becomes a UFO. Simple explanations for simple minds addled by too many hours staring at a white line. I'd been on it a couple of times myself. Nothing major ever happened. A coyote darting across the road so close I felt the whisper of its fur. A sudden thick fog that rolled in and disappeared just as quickly a few miles later. Just quirks, the road's own personality. Tonight, The promise of an earlier arrival, of a few extra hours of sleep in a real bed before heading out again, was too tempting. The stories were just stories. I checked my mirrors, flipped on my turn signal, and felt the heavy rig lean as I guided it onto the off-ramp. The sun was getting low, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and as I left the river of the interstate behind, a sense of quiet settled over the cab. It was just me and the road, the long, lonely road. Leaving the I-5 is like steering a ship from a busy shipping lane into an uncharted sea. The constant roar of traffic, the endless stream of headlights and taillights, it all just fades. One minute you're part of a massive roaring herd, the next you're utterly alone. The transition to State Route 58 was exactly that. The wide, forgiving lanes of the interstate narrowed to a single ribbon of asphalt, stretching out into a vast, empty landscape. The change in scenery was immediate and stark. The green, irrigated fields of the Central Valley gave way to the muted browns and grays of the Mojave Desert. Joshua trees, like strange, multi-armed prophets, dotted the landscape, their twisted silhouettes stark against the deepening twilight. The air itself felt different, drier, thinner. In the cab, the constant hum of the reefer unit behind me seemed to grow louder in the sudden silence. It's a sound I'm so used to it becomes white noise, but out here, with nothing else to listen to, it was a constant, mechanical heartbeat. I settled in for the long haul across the desert. This is a different kind of driving. It's not about dodging traffic or navigating complex interchanges. It's about endurance. It's about keeping your focus when the road ahead is a straight line to the horizon, when the scenery barely changes for miles on end. This is where the mind can start to wander, where the line between the world outside and the world inside your head can start to blur. About 40 minutes in, as the last sliver of the sun dipped below the distant mountains, I saw the first of the road's little quirks. Up ahead, caught in the powerful beam of my headlights, was a coyote. Now, seeing a coyote out here is about as remarkable as seeing a pigeon in a city park. They're everywhere. But this one was different. It was standing right on the edge of the asphalt, on my side of the road, and it wasn't moving. Usually they'll see the truck coming from a mile away and bolt. They're smart, skittish creatures. This one just stood there, perfectly still, its head cocked slightly to one side. Its eyes, two small green points of light, reflected my headlights with an unnerving intensity. I eased my foot off the accelerator, not wanting to hit it, but also not wanting to brake too hard and risk the load shifting. My hand instinctively went to the air horn cord, but I hesitated. There was something about its stillness that felt deliberate. As my rig thundered closer, I expected it to flinch, to run. It didn't. It just stood its ground, its gaze fixed on me. I could see the details now. The wiry fur, the lean body, the sharp snout. It was a big one, a healthy-looking male. I was doing about 55, and in the second or two it took to pass, I kept my eyes locked on it. It didn't move a muscle until my cab was right alongside it. Then it turned its head slowly, its glowing eyes tracking me, following the cab as I went by. I looked in my passenger side mirror, and it was still there, standing on the shoulder, watching my trailer lights recede into the darkness. It didn't run, it just watched. A shiver, small and involuntary, traced a line down my spine. I shook my head, a half-chuckle escaping my lips. "Weird dog," I muttered to the empty passenger seat. It was nothing. A coyote that had grown too accustomed to traffic, maybe. Or maybe it was sick. There were a dozen rational explanations. But none of them quite fit the feeling it gave me. The feeling of being observed, of being assessed. I pushed the thought from my mind, turning up the volume on my radio. A classic rock station was fading in and out, the signal weak out here. I focused on the road, on the familiar weight of the wheel in my hands, on the gauges glowing on the dashboard. But every now and then, my eyes would flick back to the rear-view mirrors, half expecting to see those two green points of light following me. There was nothing, of course, just the long, empty, and increasingly dark road behind me. The old stories about this highway,
The ones I'd so easily dismissed began to whisper at the edges of my mind.
The desert night is usually a thing of crystalline clarity. The sky is a vast, dark canvas pricked with a million stars, and you can see for miles. But not tonight. About an hour after my strange encounter with the coyote, I saw it. At first, it looked like a low-lying cloud bank on the horizon, illuminated from within by the faint glow of some distant town. But there are no towns out here, not for another 70 miles at least. As I drove closer, I realized it wasn't a cloud. It was fog, and it was thick. This wasn't the wispy, ethereal fog that sometimes rolls in from the coast. This was different. This was Thule fog, a phenomenon usually confined to the Central Valley. It's a ground-hogging, opaque wall of moisture that can drop visibility to absolute zero in a matter of seconds. I've driven through it many times, and it's a killer. Multi-car pileups are common when it gets bad. But I'd never seen it out here, in the high desert. The air's too dry. It made no sense. One moment I was driving under a clear, starry sky. The next, I plunged into a solid gray wall. It was like driving into a glass of milk. My powerful headlights, which moments before had been slicing through the darkness for half a mile, were now useless. The light simply reflected off the dense moisture, creating a blinding white glare directly in front of the truck. I instinctively hit the switch from my fog lights, which cut a low, wide beam, but they only managed to illuminate the first 10 feet of road. My speed dropped from 60 to 30, then to 15. I was crawling, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The world outside the cab ceased to exist. There was no horizon, no landscape, no sky, just the swirling, impenetrable gray. The only sound was the thrum of my engine and the faint rhythmic swoosh of the wipers as they moved uselessly across the windshield. The silence was profound, unnerving. It felt like the fog was swallowing sound itself. I leaned forward, trying to keep my eyes on the faint white line on the shoulder of the road, my only reference point in this disorienting void. Every nerve in my body was on high alert. This is when driving becomes dangerous. A stopped car, a deer, an alligator from a blown tire. I wouldn't see it until I was right on top of it. And at 80,000 pounds, you don't stop on a dime. The feeling of isolation was absolute. I was in a 20-ton sensory deprivation tank. I reached for the CB radio, a habit born of years on the road. In situations like this, you talk to other drivers. You warn them, you get reports on conditions up ahead. "Breaker 19, how's it looking eastbound on the 5/8, I said, my voice sounding strangely loud in the quiet cab. Static. Not the usual crackle and pop of an empty channel, but a dead, flat hiss. "Come on back, drivers," I tried again. "Anyone got their ears on? How's this soup up ahead?" More of the same deadening static. I switched channels, running through the dial. Nothing. It was as if the fog had created a barrier, cutting me off from the rest of the world. That feeling from earlier, the one the coyote had sparked, returned with a vengeance. The feeling of being watched. It was irrational, I knew, but in that thick, silent, gray bubble, logic began to feel very far away. My heart was pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I thought about pulling over, about waiting it out on the shoulder, but the idea of being a stationary target in this blindness was even more terrifying. What if another truck came along, just as blind as I was? No, the only way out was through. I had to keep moving. I kept my foot steady on the accelerator, maintaining a slow, cautious crawl. Every so often, a gust of wind would seem to swirl the fog, creating strange, fleeting shapes in the limited cone of my fog lights. A twisting column here, a dark, fleeting shadow there. It was just the fog playing tricks on my eyes, I told myself. It had to be. But the knot in my stomach tightened with every mile that I crept deeper into the white, silent abyss. Time loses all meaning in the fog. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour that I'd been crawling along at a snail's pace, my world reduced to the 10 feet of asphalt visible in front of my grill. My eyes ached from the strain of trying to pierce the impenetrable gray. The constant low rumble of the engine was the only thing that felt real. Everything else was a disorienting, dreamlike state. Then, for just a moment, a crosswind must have pushed through. The fog parted, like a curtain being drawn aside for a brief, terrifying second, and that's when I saw it. On the right shoulder of the road, the one I had been desperately trying to follow, was a figure. My foot slammed on the brake pedal out of pure reflex. The air brakes hissed loudly, a violent sound in the oppressive silence, and the truck lurched, the heavy trailer pushing against the cab. I gripped the wheel, my heart leaping into my throat. The figure was maybe 50 yards ahead, illuminated for just a handful of seconds in the sudden clarity. It was a person, or it had the shape of a person. They were walking, slowly, with their back to me, away from the truck, along the gravel shoulder. The posture was strange, hunched and stiff. They were wearing dark, ragged clothing that was hard to make out. I couldn't see a face, just the back of a head with long, matted hair. My first thought was a stranded motorist, someone whose car had broken down and was walking for help. But where was the car? There were no hazard lights flashing in the distance, no sign of another vehicle anywhere. "Hey!" The word was out of my mouth before I even thought, a raw shout into the confines of the cab. Just as quickly as it had cleared, the fog swirled back in, thicker than before, and the figure was gone, swallowed by the white. I was left staring at a blank wall of gray, my truck now at a dead stop in the middle of the lane. My mind was racing. Who would be out here, in the middle of nowhere, on a night like this, in a fog this thick? And walking away from the light for miles? It didn't make sense. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. My duty as a driver, as a human being, is to help. If someone is in trouble, you stop. You offer a ride, you call for help. I thought about pulling the truck fully onto the shoulder, getting out with my flashlight, but an intense, primal fear kept me rooted to my seat. The image of that stiff, hunched posture, the slow, deliberate walk, it wasn't the walk of someone seeking help. It was the walk of someone who was wandering. My hand trembled as I reached for the CB mic again. "Breaker, breaker, eastbound on the 5-8. I've got a possible pedestrian on the shoulder about a mile west of... I don't know, there are no yardsticks. Anyone out there?" The radio answered with the same dead, empty hiss. No crackle of another voice, no acknowledgement. It was like I was transmitting into a void. The feeling of being watched intensified until it was a physical pressure against my skin. I felt exposed, vulnerable, a big, brightly lit target sitting motionless in the dark. The silence from the outside world pressed in, and the inside of the cab, usually my safe haven, suddenly felt like a cage. I imagined the figure turning around in the fog, its unseen face now pointed in my direction. I had to move. Staying here was not an option. I took a deep, shuddering breath, released the brake, and slowly, gently, pressed the accelerator. The truck groaned as it began to inch forward again, its tires whispering on the wet asphalt. I turned on every light I had, the roof-mounted spots, the side lights, anything that could cut through the oppressive darkness. They did little against the fog, but they made me feel slightly less helpless. My eyes were glued to the road ahead, scanning frantically for any sign of the figure. But there was nothing, just the endless, swirling gray. It was as if the person had never been there at all. But I knew what I had seen. The image was burned into my mind. I drove on, my speedometer barely topping 10 miles per hour, every sense screaming. The quiet arisals of this road had just turned into something else entirely, something menacing.
Driving through that fog was like being in a nightmare you couldn't wake up from. Every minute felt like an hour. The image of the hunched figure on the side of the road played on a loop in my mind. Was it a drifter? A ghost? One of the specters from the old-timer stories? I'm a practical man. I believe in what I can see and touch. I believe in faulty wiring and worn-out tires. But out here, in this suffocating isolation, the border between the real and the unreal was starting to fray. I had turned off the CB radio after my last failed attempt to raise anyone. The dead static was somehow more unnerving than silence. I tried my regular AM/FM radio, hoping to find a weather report, a late-night talk show, anything to prove there was still a world out there beyond this white void. I spun the dial, and all I got was the same empty hiss across the entire band. Nothing. I gave up and drove in silence for what felt like an eternity, the only sounds being the low growl of the engine and my own increasingly ragged breathing. Then, A new sound entered the cab, a crackle. It came from the radio speakers. I hadn't touched the dial. It was still on, the volume low. I reached over and turned it up. The static was still there, but underneath it, something else was trying to break through. A faint, tinny sound. It resolved itself into music, but it wasn't any music I recognized. It was old, really old. It sounded like something from the 1930s or 40s, a scratchy recording of a big band with a crooner singing words I couldn't quite make out through the interference. It was a cheerful, upbeat tune. But in this context, it was the creepiest thing I had ever heard. It was completely out of place, a ghost of a broadcast from another era. I tried to change the station. I spun the dial from one end of the FM band to the other. The big band music followed me. Every frequency was playing the same song, rising and falling in volume as if being broadcast from a source that was moving. I switched to the AM band. Same thing. That cheerful, ghostly tune haunted the entire spectrum. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This wasn't a normal radio malfunction. I've had radios go on the fritz before, but never like this. It felt like the broadcast was meant for me, like it was coming from somewhere close by, somewhere out there in the fog. Then the music faded, replaced by a new sound. It was the voice of an announcer, the kind you hear in old movies with a crisp, formal accent. "And now, a special message for our listeners on the go," he said, his voice warped and distorted by the static. "Don't you worry, folks. The Sandman is coming. He's making his rounds." Before I could even process the bizarre words, another sound cut through the static, laid over the announcer's voice. It was the laughter of a child. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. A little girl, giggling. It was a light, innocent sound that should have been joyful, but filtered through the static and paired with the creepy announcer. It was purely terrifying. It echoed in the cab, seeming to come from all around me. That was it. I slammed my hand down on the power button, shutting the radio off. The cab was plunged back into silence, but it wasn't a clean silence. In my head, I could still hear it. The faint, ghostly echo of that little girl's laugh. I was genuinely scared now. Not just spooked, but deep in your bones terrified. This wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. This was real. The figure on the road, the impossible fog, and now this broadcast from hell. The stories weren't just stories. Something was happening on this road tonight. Something was out here with me in the fog, and it was toying with me. My knuckles were bone white on the steering wheel, and my eyes darted between the useless view ahead and the dark, empty mirrors. I felt like a mouse in a maze, and something was watching me, enjoying the show. I had to get off this road. I pressed the accelerator, pushing my speed up to a reckless 20 miles per hour, praying for an end to the fog and the highway.
Panic is a cold, sharp thing. It cuts through fatigue and reason, leaving only raw animal instinct. And my instincts were screaming at me to run. The ghost radio, the laughing child, it had pushed me past the edge of unease and into full-blown terror. The cab of my truck, once a fortress of steel and glass, now felt like a fragile, moving coffin. The feeling of being watched had morphed into something far more sinister, the feeling of being hunted. I kept my eyes glued forward, my foot heavy on the accelerator, pushing the truck faster than was safe in the dense fog. The tires hummed a frantic, high-pitched song on the wet pavement. Every shadow that danced at the edge of my vision was the hunched figure. Every gust of wind that made the fog swirl was a phantom reaching for me. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. It was during a routine check of my mirrors, a habit so ingrained it's subconscious, that I saw them. 2 points of light. They were far behind me, maybe a quarter of a mile back, but they were there. Headlights. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees weak. Another vehicle, another person. I wasn't alone out here.
It was probably just another trucker who had made the same foolish decision to take this shortcut. I eased my foot off the accelerator, slowing down slightly. The unwritten rule of the road is that if someone is moving faster than you, you let them pass. It's safer for everyone. I expected the headlights to grow larger, for the vehicle to pull into the non-existent opposing lane and go around me. But it didn't. The headlights maintained their distance, a steady, watchful presence in my mirrors. They were matching my speed exactly. Okay, I thought. Maybe they're just being cautious. They see my trailer lights and are content to hang back, letting me carve a path through the fog. It made sense. I would probably do the same thing. I settled back into my driving, the initial relief still warming me, but a new seed of unease was already beginning to sprout. For 10 minutes we continued this way, a two-vehicle convoy moving through the gray void, me in the lead, them hanging back. But the longer it went on, the more it felt wrong. There was no attempt to communicate, no flicker of the high beams, no chatter on the CB, which I had tentatively turned back on, only to be met with the same dead hiss. Then, they sped up. The 2 points of light grew rapidly in my mirrors, closing the distance with alarming speed. They were right on my tail, so close that the glare from their headlights completely filled my mirrors, blinding me to anything else behind them. My heart hammered against my ribs. What were they doing? Tailgating a semi in near-zero visibility is suicide. What the hell are you doing? I yelled at the mirror as if they could hear me. Back off! As suddenly as they had appeared, they dropped back, the lights shrinking until they were once again at their original, distant position. My relief was short-lived. A minute later, they did it again. Rushing up to my bumper, their lights flooding my cab before retreating back into the darkness. It was a game, a terrifying, sadistic game of cat and mouse. They weren't trying to pass. They were hurting me, toying with me. The fear turned to a hot, angry adrenaline. I wasn't prey. I was in an 18-wheeler, a monster of the highway. I put the hammer down. The engine roared in protest as I pushed the truck faster and faster, far beyond what was safe. 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. The white line on the shoulder became a blur. It was reckless, insane, but I didn't care. I just had to get away from those lights. But they stayed with me. No matter how fast I went, they matched my speed perfectly. When I slowed for a slight curve, they slowed. When I sped up on a straightaway, they sped up. They were a shadow, an extension of my own truck, always there in my mirrors, a constant, silent, menacing presence. I couldn't see the vehicle itself, just the two impossibly bright, piercing headlights that seemed to burn right through me. There was no driver, no car, just the lights and the solid black mass behind them. The demon car from the Proctor Valley urban legend. This was it. This was how it ended. I was going to crash, to fly off the road into the dark desert, or the thing behind me was going to do something worse. The cab felt like it was shrinking, the air thick and hard to breathe. I was trapped, and the only way out was forward.
My world had shrunk to a feedback loop of terror. The road ahead, the gauges on the dash, and the blinding lights in my mirrors. That was all that existed. I was driving on pure adrenaline, my hands locked under the steering wheel, my body rigid with fear. The game of cat and mouse with the headlights behind me had gone on for an eternity. They would rush up, flooding my cab with a piercing, unnatural light, then retreat, leaving me in a darkness that felt even more profound than before. I was losing it. I could feel my composure cracking, the edges of my sanity fraying. I was talking to myself, to the lights, to the empty road. What do you want? Leave me alone. My voice was a hoarse croak. The childish laughter from the radio echoed in my memory, and I imagined it was coming from the vehicle behind me. I was so focused on the lights in my mirror, so consumed by the chase, that I almost missed it. A faint glow ahead of me. It wasn't the swirling, reflective glare of the fog. It was different. A steady, warm, yellow light. Then another, And another. Streetlights. It was a town, civilization. My heart, which had been trying to beat its way out of my chest, gave a painful lurch of hope. I fixed my eyes on the lights, treating them like a life raft in a stormy sea. I pushed the truck harder, ignoring the screaming protests of the engine, ignoring the dancing headlights in my mirror. The town. I just had to make it to the town. As I got closer, I could make out the silhouette of a gas station sign, the familiar shape of a diner. The fog, which had been an impenetrable wall for miles, began to thin. I could see the individual streetlights now, the outlines of buildings. The world was starting to come back into focus. I crossed what felt like an invisible line. One moment I was in the thick, oppressive soup. The next, I was out of it. The fog didn't just thin out, it stopped. It was as if I had driven through a curtain. Behind me, the fog bank stood like a solid gray cliff, a wall of white in the middle of the desert. My first instinct was to look in the mirrors. The road behind me was empty. The headlights were gone. There was no car, no truck, nothing. Just the two-lane asphalt road stretching back until it was swallowed by that bizarre, unnatural wall of fog. I kept driving, my foot still heavy on the accelerator, until I was fully within the circle of light cast by the small town. I saw a 24-hour truck stop, its parking lot mostly empty, a beacon of glorious, mundane normalcy. I steered the truck towards it, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I didn't even bother to find a proper spot, just pulled the truck to a stop in a wide-open area, the engine still rumbling. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. I sat there for a full minute, my hands still fused to the steering wheel, just staring at the lighted diner. My whole body was trembling, a violent, uncontrollable shiver. I finally managed to pry my hands free. They were shaking so badly I could barely unlatch my seatbelt. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs feeling like they were made of jelly. The cool, clean desert air hit my face, and I took a deep, shuddering breath. I leaned against the warm grill of my truck, looking back down the road. The fog bank was still there, a few miles back, a silent, mysterious cloud sitting on the highway under the first faint hints of the approaching dawn. I don't know what happened on that road. Fatigue, a waking nightmare brought on by too many hours behind the wheel? It felt too real for that. The coyote, the fog, the figure, the radio, the lights. It was a connected series of events, a story that road wanted to tell me. I've been driving for 15 years. I've seen a lot of strange things, but nothing like that. Nothing that made me question my own senses, my own sanity. I never told my dispatcher why I was 3 hours late. I just blamed a bad traffic jam, an overturned vehicle. You can't exactly tell them you were being chased by a phantom car in a haunted fog. They'd send you for a mandatory drug test and a psych evaluation. I've never taken that shortcut again. I don't care if I'm running late. I'll stick to the big roads, the ones full of other drivers, of witnesses. Some roads, you see, they have their own rules. They have their own stories. And sometimes, you're not just passing through. You become part of the story yourself. And it's a story I haven't told a single soul. Until now.